Joining us now in the studio is Khalil Jahshan. He's the Executive Director of the Arab Center here in Washington, D.C. From Jerusalem, we're joined by Amotz Asa-El. He's a senior commentator for the Jerusalem Post. And Magid is the Washington correspondent for Jewish Insider and was previously based in Amman, Jordan, as a contributor for Al Monitor. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Let's start in Jerusalem with Amotz. Amotz, our correspondent just reported that this occupation has been going on for 50 years, and I am aware that this is a definition that is disputed by Israel. But over this past 50 years, there have been some agreements, there have been a lot of violence. When you reflect over the past 5 decades, do you now see that there could be change coming?
I actually do believe there will be change. We've seen plenty of change along these very painful 50 years. The most fundamental change happened first when the average Israeli in the 1990s resigned to the willingness to acquiesce with the eventual emergence of Palestinian statehood, something that previously there was a consensus in Israel to oppose. Now, since the mid-90s, I would say most Israelis accept the idea of a Palestinian state, and there was parallel to that also a burgeoning Palestinian acquiescence with the Zionist idea. Not that they became Zionists, but their leaders told them effectively that the Jewish state was here to stay, and that therefore doing business with it and reaching some kind of harmony with it became inevitable. I think these were changes that previously were not foreseen, and based on them, I now say concerning the future, that I do believe perhaps it won't happen in our time, maybe in the next generation or in the one after it, but ultimately the full recognition on both sides of this divide will arrive and harmony will be established, much the way it was in post-war Europe between what previously seemed like implacable enemies.
So, Khalil, do you share that optimism? Because what we hear from people on the ground is very, very different. There was a recent survey cited by the French news agency AFP, which said that 78% of Israelis think there is no chance of a peace agreement in the foreseeable future. 60% of Palestinians believe a two-state solution is no longer viable. So given those sentiments, do you think progress can be made?
I think progress could be made because, frankly, the two parties have no other choice but to take that route. The numbers are not very encouraging when you look at 78 versus 60. I mean, there is a discrepancy between the two, but that's not very relevant. It's a majority or a plurality on either side that are not, let's say, supportive. But again, let's not mix not supportive of peace versus frustrated with the two-state solution, what has been tried before. What has been tried before did not work. It frustrated both sides. So both sides are apprehensive about that. Number two, public opinion in the Middle East, regardless of what people look, how they look at the region in terms of ideological and religion and historic and what have you. Frankly, I find public opinion in the region, and we do a lot of public opinions at the center, the Arab Center, public opinion tends to be fickle on both sides, tends to be emotional, and would change very quickly if there is a serious, potentially promising peace process that's available to both sides and that shows some, if you will, added value to both sides. You will see those numbers drop real quickly.
Right, Aaron, no doubt there have been some changes for the better over the past 50 years, as we've just heard. But the crux of the problem still remains, doesn't it? There's still an occupation. There's no chance we can see right now of a two-state solution.
Exactly, and I'm a little bit more pessimistic. There are certain public opinion polls that say that both sides are interested in an eventual two-state solution, but then when you hammer into the details, that's when everything seems to fall apart. So Jerusalem is obviously one of the most sensitive issues, and many Israelis still support an undivided Jerusalem, including the current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. There will be no Palestinian state without a capital in East Jerusalem, so that's going to be one of the most sensitive issues. And then you also have to look at the refugee issue. Many Palestinians still call for a significant right of return of Palestinians who either live in exile or in the West Bank back to their original hometowns within 1967 Israel. And for many Israelis, that's a total non-starter. So you have Jerusalem, you have refugees, you have settlements. And while people might agree with the idea of a two-state solution, the difficult details make the reason why there is no solution to the conflict continue until this day.
Aaron, do you believe that Israel is under any kind of serious pressure right now to change the status quo?
Unfortunately, I do not. President Trump was just in Israel and also in Bethlehem. He did not mention a two-state solution at all. I don't see how you can reach a quote-unquote ultimate deal without providing the Palestinians some sort of independence. That's number one. He didn't even mention settlements. He didn't mention occupation. If there is no public pressure on these minimal demands of a two-state solution, I don't see how Israel feels like they have to compromise on some of these very painful national issues like Jerusalem or settlements.
Okay, let me get Amotz's view on that. Amotz, Aaron just mentioned the visit to Israel by the new United States President Trump. Let's take a listen to what President Trump said.
I am truly hopeful that America can help Israel and the Palestinians forge peace and bring new hope to the region and its people. I also firmly believe that if Israel and the Palestinians can make peace, it will begin a process of peace all throughout the Middle East, and that would be an amazing accomplishment.
So, Amotz, this is a president who talks of an ultimate deal.
You're asking for my response to that, I gather,
yeah.
Anand. I would say this. Trump's, for now, involvement and ideas, or what passed for ideas over there, are completely irrelevant. First of all, because he has displayed an ignorance concerning the details of this conflict that really leaves him unequipped to affect it. But that is besides the point. The personal issue here and the entire baggage with which external players arrive are immaterial, because the crux of the problem is that Mahmoud Abbas currently does not lead the entire Palestinian people. He does not deliver Gaza. Gaza does not recognize his leadership. It is broken away. They're a split society, and they're therefore a split structure, and he cannot bring them certainly to agree to any compromise of any sort with Israel, because they do not even recognize Israel's right to exist. This is the equivalent of the moment at which Israel's project was early 1948, when David Ben-Gurion was still rivaled by the much more militant Menachem Begin, a rivalry that was decided when David Ben-Gurion confronted violently Menachem Begin, who brought to the shores of Tel Aviv an arms ship, and David Ben-Gurion ordered it sunk, and it was sunk with Menachem Begin on board. He had to dive into the waters. He himself was saved, others drowned. This was the confrontation that decided the internal Israeli conflict in a way that David Ben-Gurion emerged from it as the sole, exclusive, and undisputed leader of the Israeli project. Something similar, I'm not saying as violent, but something as politically decisive has to happen within the Palestinian situation in order for their leaders, for their elected leaders, to be in a position to deliver a deal that involves compromises, as it obviously will have to do in order for it to be a deal.
Khalil, how do the Palestinians overcome these divisions? You know, we have the West Bank. Fatah is in nominal control in the West Bank, and we have Hamas running Gaza.
Certainly that division between and differences, political differences between the two have not helped the Palestinian cause. However, I think it's an exaggerated, almost an excuse actually, for the Israelis to avoid that. You heard Amotz say they need to be more firm, if you will, or more assertive politically. I agree with that. But behind that, though, if you notice his statement carefully, he was talking essentially what Palestinians view as civil war, that the Palestinians need to fight it out and decide. Instead of fighting out, why don't we have a serious peace proposal that will include, once and for all, free and democratic elections, which you can't have under occupation. So we have to declare the end of occupation, give the Palestinians a chance to vote. They will elect the right leader that they would like to represent them in the peace process, and then you can have a peace process.
With whom will Israel negotiate? With the
Right now, nobody. I don't think Israel has basically a favorite, if you will, Palestinian. They view that the Palestinians are not ready, at least the current government and its supporters. There are many Israelis who view that there are possibilities for a peace process. And look, public opinion is discouraging on both sides right now, but in the presence of a promising process, public opinion is very fickle in the region, and it could change dramatically on both sides. And what you need is leadership on both sides to produce that type of serious change. Peace in the conventional way, the way we have tried in the past, two-state solution only as a verbal expression without any meaningful way dealing with the final status issues that Aaron mentioned earlier will not produce the intended results. So there has to be a detailed process, and I agree with Amotz in terms of at least fully with his assessment of the present administration. I think this administration is not equipped. I do not see here in Washington any preparation or understanding for what it takes to achieve peace between the two parties. But that doesn't mean we should hide behind that weakness, if you will, and do nothing, because the current situation is untenable and it doesn't serve the interests of either party.
And Aaron, talking about leadership on the Israeli side, do you see an Israeli government, the current government or a government in the future, actually dismantle settlements, actually make these significant territorial concessions that will be needed for some kind of settlement?
Well, if you look since 2009, the Israeli public have elected for the last 3 elections a right-wing government led by Prime Minister Netanyahu. And in the current coalition, one of the most right-wing, if not the most hawkish coalition in Israeli history, you have significant members and ministers who are opposed to the establishment of any Palestinian state in any boundaries, led by Naftali Bennett. So it's difficult to see under the current conditions that the Israeli public would be interested in withdrawing from significant elements of the West Bank and East Jerusalem. You can't predict what's going to happen in 10 to 20 years, but the trajectory is certainly very worrisome.